Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is dying. In their last 7 minutes, their brain does something scientists never expected. It doesn't shut down quietly. In some cases, it lights up more than it has in years. Doctors accidentally recorded this moment. What they found is now rewriting what we think death actually is. This isn't near-death experience folklore. This is EEG data, published in real medical journals from real dying patients. So what actually happens, minute by minute, in the final 7 minutes of a human life? We're going to walk through it in real time. Minute 7, minute 6, all the way down to 0. Some of this will comfort you. Some of it will genuinely unsettle you. Minute 7 starts now. Minute 7. A patient lies in a hospital bed, kept alive by a ventilator. Their family has just made the hardest decision of their lives. They've agreed to withdraw life support. In that exact moment, something strange happens inside the patient's skull. Researchers at the University of Michigan were recording 4 dying patients' brains with EEG when they noticed it. 2 of the 4 showed a sudden surge of brain activity right after the ventilator was turned off. Not random noise, a specific frequency called gamma waves, the same waves linked to conscious awareness. Gamma waves are what your brain produces when you're focused, alert, or actively perceiving the world around you. They're not supposed to appear in a dying, oxygen-starved brain. And yet there they were. This had only ever been documented in dying rats before. This was the first hint it might happen in humans too. The lead researcher, Dr. Jimmo Borjigin, had seen this exact pattern more than a decade earlier in a completely different species. In 2013, her lab found that rats' brains produced a burst of gamma activity for 30 seconds after their hearts stopped. At the time, nobody knew if that meant anything for humans. It seemed like a strange footnote. Then, in a separate case, a person who died of a heart attack while hooked up to monitoring equipment showed the same gamma spike. 3 separate pieces of evidence: rats, a heart attack patient, and now these 4 hospital patients, all pointing the same direction. The surge activated in areas of the brain tied to dreaming, memory, and something else: visual hallucinations. Specifically, the same regions active during epileptic hallucinations. Regions that generate vivid, unbidden imagery. In other words, in the final minutes, the brain may not be shutting off. It may be generating an experience. One researcher not involved in the study called it a possible marker of lucid consciousness. Lucid, not confused, not fading, possibly aware, in a body that has already stopped breathing on its own. Nobody can ask these patients what they experienced. That's the unbearable limit of this research. But the timing is what makes it eerie. The brain surges right as the machines keeping the body alive are switched off. Minute 6. In 2016, in a hospital in Vancouver, doctors were treating an 87-year-old man for a brain injury. He'd developed epilepsy after the injury, so his medical team attached EEG sensors to track his seizures. Nobody planned for what happened next. Mid-recording, the man suffered a sudden fatal heart attack. The EEG kept running. For the first time ever, doctors had captured continuous brain activity through the actual moment of death. Dr. Ajmal Zemar, the neurosurgeon involved, called it a complete accident. This kind of recording simply cannot be planned. You can't schedule an EEG for someone who's about to die naturally. It only happens by chance, once in a career. The team analyzed 900 seconds of brain activity, focusing closely on the 30 seconds before and after his heart stopped. In that window, they saw shifts across nearly every type of brain wave: gamma, delta, theta, alpha, beta, all of them. Gamma oscillations stood out the most. They're tied to high-level thinking, conscious perception, memory retrieval, focused attention. The pattern of activity closely resembled what happens in a healthy brain during memory recall or during a vivid dream. Zemar's theory: the brain may generate one final memory replay in its last seconds, a highlight reel of a life. It's the neuroscience explanation for something people have described for centuries: life flashing before your eyes. For generations, this was dismissed as a metaphor, a trick of storytelling, not biology. Now, there's an actual brain recording that fits the description. The researchers were careful not to overclaim. One case, one 87-year-old brain, already altered by injury and medication. It's not proof that everyone experiences a memory montage while dying, but it's the first physical evidence that it's even possible. And it raises a harder question. If the brain is still actively processing memories, is a person still, in some sense, present? This gets uncomfortable fast because the moment we call death is usually marked by the heart, not the brain. A flatlining heart monitor is when most people assume a life has ended. This recording suggests the brain might not agree. Zemar put it plainly. These findings challenge our understanding of when exactly life ends. That's not just a philosophical point. It has real consequences for one very specific medical decision: organ donation. Timing matters enormously because organs need to be removed while they're still viable. If brain activity can outlast the moment doctors currently define as death, that entire timeline may need to be reconsidered. Minute 5? No, minute 4. Now we go somewhere stranger. Not seconds before death, but hours before it. Hospice workers have a name for it: terminal lucidity. Some call it simply the rally. It happens to people who have been unresponsive for years, people with advanced dementia who no longer recognize their own family. And then, without warning, they wake up, not confused, not partially, completely themselves again. One hospice director described a bedridden patient who hadn't spoken in ages. He suddenly got up on his own. He walked to the dining room. He sat down. He ate an entire steak dinner and talked with his family like nothing was wrong. Then he went back to bed, fell asleep, and died the next day. This isn't an isolated story. Medical case reports describing this phenomenon go back to the 1700s. In one survey, about 70% of nursing home caregivers said they had personally witnessed it within the past 5 years. In roughly half of documented cases, the lucid window opens in the final 24 hours of a person's life. In almost 90% of cases, it happens within the final week. It's called paradoxical because it directly contradicts what we think we know about diseases like dementia. Dementia is supposed to be a one-way street. Neurons die, and they don't come back. There's no reversing it. And yet, for a few hours, the disease seems to pause. Memories return. Personality returns. Awareness returns. Nobody knows exactly why. One theory: the body might flood the brain with internal steroids in its final push, sparking a burst of activity. But that's speculation, not confirmed science. Studying this is nearly impossible for one obvious ethical reason. You cannot plan an experiment around a moment nobody can predict in patients who are actively dying. Researchers can only collect these cases after the fact, through interviews with grieving families and hospice staff. For families, this moment can feel like a miracle, a final gift, a chance to say goodbye properly. But hospice workers warn it can also be dangerously misleading. Families sometimes think their loved one is recovering. They cancel hospice care. They request aggressive treatment again, hoping this is a turning point. It almost never is. Terminal lucidity is not remission. It's widely believed to be a sign the end is very close. Some researchers now think terminal lucidity and the Gamma Surge.Minute 7 might be connected, different expressions of the same dying process. A brain that seems to be doing everything except what we expect. Instead of shutting down, it fights, briefly, to come back online. Minute 3. Let's get more specific about what's physically happening inside a dying brain, because it's not a simple shutdown. When the heart stops, oxygen delivery to the brain stops within seconds. You'd expect total, immediate silence. That's not what happens. The brain has emergency backup systems. Cells don't die the instant oxygen runs out. They die over minutes, not milliseconds. During that window, something unexpected occurs. Some scientists believe the dying brain temporarily loses its normal inhibitory control. In a healthy, awake brain, certain neurons constantly suppress others, keeping activity organized and controlled. As the brain runs out of energy, those suppressing signals may fail first, releasing a flood of uncontrolled electrical activity. That flood could be the source of the gamma surge, not the brain waking up, but its safety brakes failing. It's a controversial theory. Other researchers think the surge could genuinely reflect a final burst of conscious experience. There's a competing explanation entirely, something called REM intrusion, where dreaming brain patterns leak into a waking or dying state. REM sleep produces gamma waves too, the same frequency linked to vivid dreaming and hallucination. Under this theory, near-death visions aren't a glimpse of anything beyond life. They're the brain's dream machinery misfiring under extreme stress. This isn't unique to dying. People report similar visions during fainting, meditation, or even near-miss accidents that didn't involve dying at all. That detail matters. If lights, tunnels, and floating sensations can happen without dying, they may not require death to explain them at all. Both explanations, the brake failure theory and the dream intrusion theory, would produce nearly identical EEG readings. That's the frustrating part. We can measure exactly what the brain's electricity is doing. We still can't measure what, if anything, it feels like from the inside. That gap between data and experience is why this remains one of the most disputed areas in all of neuroscience. Every researcher agrees on one thing, though. The old assumption that a dying brain just quietly powers down is simply wrong. Something is happening. The debate now is only over what that something means. Minute 2. While the brain surges internally, something is also happening on the outside, what a dying person can still take in. For decades, hospice workers have repeated one piece of advice to grieving families. Keep talking, because hearing is the last sense to go. It was always treated as comforting folklore. In 2020, researchers at the University of British Columbia decided to actually test it. They studied hospice patients at a Vancouver facility, first while conscious, then again after they became unresponsive. They played sequences of tones, mostly predictable, occasionally an unexpected pitch, and measured the brain's electrical response with EEG. In a healthy brain, an unexpected sound triggers a very specific, reliable electrical signature called mismatch negativity. It's one of the most dependable markers in all of neuroscience. It shows up even under anesthesia, even in a coma. The researchers found that same signature in dying, unresponsive hospice patients, sometimes within hours of their death. Their brains were still distinguishing between an ordinary sound and an unusual one, still processing, still, in some technical sense, listening. The lead researcher was careful about the limits of this finding. Detecting a sound is not the same as understanding it. They can't confirm whether a dying person recognizes a voice, understands words, or forms any memory of what's being said to them. But the auditory pathway itself, the raw ability to register sound, appears to keep functioning until nearly the very end. That means the folk wisdom passed down for generations by hospice nurses turned out to have a real neurological basis. The advice to speak to someone, even after they stop responding, wasn't just for the comfort of the family in the room. There may genuinely be someone in there, still receiving what's being said, even with no way left to respond. 1 minute left, and the strangest part of this entire story is still ahead. Minute 1. Here's a question that sounds simple, but has no clean answer. What moment exactly counts as death? For most of history, it was the heart. No pulse, no breath. That was it. The moment was declared, and it was final. Modern medicine complicated that completely. Machines can keep a heart beating artificially long after the brain has stopped functioning. So doctors created a second definition: brain death, a complete, irreversible loss of all brain activity, even with the heart still going. Now these accidental EEG recordings are complicating things again, in the opposite direction. If a heart stops, but the brain keeps producing organized, conscious-like activity for a stretch afterward, which moment is the real one? This isn't just an academic debate. There's a documented, if rare, phenomenon called the Lazarus phenomenon. It's when a patient's heart spontaneously starts beating again, minutes after doctors have stopped CPR and declared them dead. It's happened enough times that resuscitation guidelines now recommend observing a patient for several minutes after stopping CPR, just in case. Every one of these findings pushes the boundary of death a little further out, later than we assumed, and every one of them collides directly with a life-saving practice that depends on speed: organ transplantation. Organs need blood flow and oxygen to stay usable. The longer doctors wait to confirm death, the more organs become unviable. So there's a genuine, unresolved tension between giving the dying process more time and giving transplant recipients a working organ in time. Neurosurgeon Ajmal Zemar said it directly. These findings raise real questions about the timing of organ donation. There's no consensus answer yet. Different hospitals, different countries apply different waiting windows before declaring death final. Which means, right now, the honest answer to when does life end is, it depends on which hospital you're in. So what actually happens in your last 7 minutes? Based on what we know now, here's the honest summary. Your brain likely doesn't switch off like a light. In some cases, it may surge, briefly, into something resembling heightened awareness. In the hours before, if you have advanced dementia, there's a real chance of one final, lucid window with the people you love. Your hearing may be the last thing to leave you, meaning the voices in the room could be reaching you until the very end. And the actual moment your life ends may not be a single instant at all, but a blurry, disputed process doctors are still redefining. None of this confirms an afterlife. None of this disproves one either. What it confirms is that dying is far more active than we assumed. If this changed how you think about death or about someone you've lost, you're not alone. That's exactly why this research keeps getting made. If you want to understand the brain even more, before you have to think about any of this again, there's another video you should watch next. Subscribe if you want more of these deep dives, and I'll see you in the next one.